and Ken. This is Anna Lee. For this demo, I'm going to start with the impetus for developing the data sets and analysis that underlie the tool, and then my colleague Melissa will walk through the key data sets and components of the terrestrial analysis. And then I'll describe and demonstrate our new tool to estimate carbon stock. I'll next then provide an overview of how we address sea level rise for coastal sites and how those results were incorporated into this tool. And lastly, Melissa will show some different ways the tool can be used and how users can access the data that underlies the tool. And you can see our email address at the bottom of this slide. So if you have any questions after this or while you're using the tool, feel free to send us an email. So as climate change drives shifts in species and ecosystems in unpredictable ways, conservation plans based on current biodiversity patterns will become less effective at sustaining species and natural processes over the long term. And the current configuration of protected areas may fail to adequately provide access to the diverse climatic conditions species and populations need to persist and thrive. Our team at the Center for Resilient Conservation Science, led by Dr. Mark Anderson, has been focused on an approach to prioritize areas for conservation based on land characteristics that increase species diversity and resilience. And we define resilience as the capacity of a site, so a physical location, to adapt to climate change while maintaining diversity and ecological function. So this strategy, this overarching strategy, we refer to as conserving nature stage, or CNS, and it focuses conservation efforts on the physical factors that drive biodiversity, so giving species and natural communities the best chance to rearrange themselves as the climate changes. It also has the advantage of relying on on-the-ground information instead of predictive climate models, which are our best estimate of how the world will change. So the primary result of our conserving nature stage work is the Resilient and Connected Network, or RCN, which we'll probably say a lot, for the contiguous US. And the RCN is a proposed conservation network of representative climate resilient sites, and it's designed to sustain biodiversity and ecological functions into the future under a changing climate. The network also protects source water, carbon stocks, oxygen, and recreational space that people depend on. The network was identified and mapped over 10 years by Nature Conservancy scientists using publicly available data in a process that involved hundreds of scientists from agencies, academia, and NGOs across the US. Our hope is that the network could be a starting point for conversations with local communities, indigenous tribes, land trust agencies, corporations, and funders on how to coordinate conservation efforts to increase our collective impact and sustain nature. Resilient lands and waters could be conserved by a wide range of measures, from good land stewardship to other forms of private land conservation to outright fee or easement acquisition by various levels of government. So the network and the components used to build it are all available in the Resilient Land Mapping tool. And Melissa's now going to walk through the key components of the terrestrial analysis. So Melissa, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Annalee. Thank you, Annalee. While Annalee and I are presenting this to you today, the project was a group effort by the Center for Resilient Conservation Science. This is our website that you can see here, and you can access that at crcs.tnc.org. The Center for Resilient Conservation Science was formed in 2021 at the North America program level of the Nature Conservancy. Our team, which you can see here, is led by Dr. Mark Anderson. It also includes Arlene Olivero, Marta Ribera, John Prince, who recently retired, Eric Martin. I just want to give Eric a special mention here today because he was really the one that built the whole tool and the functionality. So he deserves a lot of credit for what we're showing today. And then also a Mary Corey. And although our name is new, the staff has a long tenure and deep experience in conservation science. This group has been working together for the last 10 years to develop the resilient and connected landscape analysis and the map. In this presentation, I will explain the components of the analysis and show you the final map, give you a demo of the Resilient Land Mapping tool, and explain how to get more information and access the data. So this is the Resilient Land Mapping tool, and you can access that by going to maps.tnc.org/resilient land. And when you first enter the tool, you'll see the splash screen here, and it gives you an opportunity to view the core concepts, some information about our major funders. And then also here, just I want to point out that within the tool, we have grayed out the indigenous lands. Although we have completed the analysis on the indigenous lands, we want to respect the sovereignty of those lands. And we're currently in conversations with indigenous lands about how best to share and communicate our data with them. And if, in many indigenous, we have enabled the ability for indigenous tribes, if they write us, we have a special password that they can use to access the data on their lands. So once you go through the splash screen here, you'll see the resilient land mapping tool. And I want to first point out the study regions. These study regions, as we said, we can't do this project alone. We tailored each of our analysis to each specific region. And we were able to do this by having groups of experts on region-specific steering committees that served as advisors to fit the analysis to each unique geography. In total, there are over 250 scientists from the Nature Conservancy, other nonprofits, natural heritage programs, universities, state, federal agencies that helped us craft this analysis. And for each of these regions, we have, they were done individually, and we have specific reports for each of the regions that detail how the specifics of the analysis and what little things we changed to tailor it. So as you click on each of these individual study regions, you will see it'll tell you information about the report. And if you click on it, it will actually take you to the website where you can download the report and data. So the first thing I want to do, we're first going to look at the settings. And the settings are down here in resilient sites. So to identify the areas that are most likely to sustain biodiversity in a changing climate, we identified 3 ingredients that are critical: resilient land, permeable landscapes, and resilient systems and species. Together, these 3 factors make up the resilient and connected landscapes, or the RCN. And to begin with, I'm going to talk about the first ingredient, which is resilient land. And the resilient and connected landscapes is based off of the theory of conserving nature's stage. And that is that species distributions are tied to underlying geology and elevation. For example, limestone areas are unique areas, and they have over 300 unique species like spiny soft-shelled turtle, gray bat, limestone famefower, and the Tennessee cave salamander. So very unique, specific settings. And to conserve a full spectrum of biodiversity, we need to protect all of these different geophysical settings. For the resilient and connected landscapes, we comprehensively map geophysical settings based off of geology, elevation, topography, and hydrography. And then within each geophysical setting, we mapped the areas that have the most microclimates and the most connected areas within a local neighborhood. Right here, I'm showing you the comprehensive map of our geophysical settings. And you can click here on a specific area, and it'll tell you a little definition of the geophysical settings, and also tell you what geophysical setting it is in. And for all of these, to get the legend, to see what the individual colors mean, you can always scroll down. The legend here is down on the bottom right. So the base of the resilient sites are, we stratified it by each of these geophysical settings, and then we looked at 2 factors: landscape diversity and local connectedness. Landscape diversity is really measuring the number of microclimates. In order to do that, we created a continuous map of landforms at a 30-meter resolution based off of a DEM. So this is the landscape diversity map, the results, but they are based off of this landform map. And these landforms are based off of the DEM, and we calculated the slope, land position index, and moisture index. And then based off of those 3 factors, we used cutoffs that were informed by species ecology to create these discrete landforms. And examples of these discrete landforms could be steep slopes, upper flats, or pluvial flats. And if you want to zoom in, you can kind of see the detail in each of these landforms. And once again, if you click on it, you can get more information on the landforms. Like the one I clicked on is an upper flat. And then the legend is down here on the bottom right. In addition to, so for landscape diversity, we calculated the number of landforms in a 1,000-acre and 100-acre circle. And then we also added, because wetlands are going to be so important in climate change, we added in an additional factor for areas that have high wetlands to increase that landscape diversity. And I'll show you the kind of zooming out here, the comprehensive landscape diversity map again. So in these maps that are in the brown to green color scheme, the areas in green are above average. We measure everything in above average, measure many things in above average, average, and below average. We don't know exactly what cutoffs or what cutoffs make something resilient versus non-resilient. So we compare it. We compare it to the ecoregion to the region in order and get this above average, below average, average score. So the ones that are above average are in green, the average are in yellow, and the below average are in brown. The next factor that we looked at to make up our resilient sites is local connectedness. And for local connectedness, we used the NLCD to continuously map resistance to movement across the US. We converted the land use classes into values that represent resistance to movement, where natural lands have a low resistance of 1, agricultural lands have a moderate resistance of 7, and highly developed lands have a high resistance of 20. And then they're, capturing the whole spectrum of the NLCD and various land uses, and also augmented that in specific regions based on tailoring that to region-specific land uses. And then once we had that resistance grid, we used a resistant kernel model, which looks at local connectedness in a kernel and zooms out to a local radius. So it measures the local connectedness here within a 3-kilometer radius of a focal cell and calculates that across the landscape. So we can get a nationwide view of local connectedness. So then we combine the landscape diversity and local connectedness together, and we combine them, assessed for each geophysical setting. And when we do that, we average the landscape diversity and local connectedness together to get a final map of resilient sites across the US. And this has the same green, yellow, brown color scheme, where green areas are the areas that are expected to be resilient in a changing climate. Now that I've given you an overview of the first ingredient, resilient land, let's move on to the second ingredient, permeable landscapes. A permeable landscape is a connected landscape that allows for movement and facilitates range shifts in a changing climate. For our model of climate flow, we used a continuous wall-to-wall method with a tool called CircuitScape. We modeled anthropogenic flow using the same resistance grid that we used in local connectedness, and modeled 3 kinds of climate flow, which the scientific literature and studies have shown to be the expected species responses to climate change. These 3 kinds of flow are upslope flow to cooler areas as you increase in elevation, downslope flow towards moisture and cooler landforms, and then northward flow to get cooler climates as you increase in latitude. This resulting map has the diffuse climate flow in blue here, and then average flow is in yellow, and blocked flow is in brown. To aid in kind of understanding this map, we've then classified it into these categorical flows. And here, this categorical flow, all the blue areas here are still diffuse flow, and diffuse flow are areas that have many options for species to move and rearrange in climate change. The darker blue are areas of climate flow, so that are have climate options, so that upslope, downslope, or northward flow. The yellow areas are pinch points, or areas where flow gets constrained or funneled through the landscape. And I think about some of the riparian buffers through agricultural landscapes. That's in my head a really good example of where you get these pinch points in the landscape. And then the areas here in white on this map are areas of blocked flow, where there's not a lot of flow through the landscape. The last ingredient is resilient systems and species, and you can find that on our visualize here as this third main ingredient. And all of these green areas are important areas for biodiversity. And then just to give you a little more detail, you can go down to this recognized biodiversity value and get a more detailed map. So these areas are intact habitats, unique communities, and rare species population that together represent important biodiversity areas in the continental United States. We drew primarily upon TNC's eco-regional plans, and the eco-regional plans in this green area are the bright green and the dark green are the eco-regional plans. And the other, we also drew from the state wildlife action plans. So areas that were both the state wildlife action plans and the ecoregion based, the TNC based ones are this darkest green. The bright green are just the TNC ecoregional plans, and the olive green are just the state wildlife action plans. We also included some region specific important places for biodiversity. Such as that where they're regionally unique, like important areas for sage grouse. And that's the lightest green gray areas on this map. So to build the resilient and connected land network map, we combine these three factors: the site resilience, the connectivity and climate flow, and the recognized biodiversity. And we basically overlaid them together to create this resilient and connected network map, which is shown here. In this map, the darkest green areas are the areas that are important for resilience, flow, and recognized biodiversity. The blue areas are areas that just have resilience and flow. And the lightest green areas are the areas that are important for resilience and recognized biodiversity. And I would suggest as you start off exploring this map, you kind of stick to this 3-color map because it is the simplest one. But if you really want to dig in and figure out what factors went into what sites, we do have a detailed version here that has many more colors, and you can see more detail on that overlap or sandwich of that information. In this resilient and connected network map, about 33% of the land area and contains resilient examples of all environments. There's over 250,000 occurrences of intact habitats, rare species, and unique communities. And this whole network is arranged for maximum climate flow. So species should be able to move and rearrange in a changing climate. And about 46% of this land is secured. And to see securement, there's the ability here to click on and off the secured lands. And you can adjust the transparency so you can see the secured lands on top and then see how that overlaps with the RCN or any of the other data layers. Also with secured lands, it is a raster, but you can, just like everything, it's not a raster, it is a polygon layer. So you can click on these and get the information about each of the secured lands. So if you click here, this will tell you the name of the secured lands and some information about it, which is very handy as you're trying to make decisions based off of this map or locate where you are. I'm not sure. Of course,
press the little arrow to the side there. It's one of
yes. 3. Oh, there we go. Great. So there was multiple ones on here. So this is Indian Head, which is gap status 1 in acres. Yeah, so there's when they overlap, this is Hunter Mountain here. When they overlap, with any of these, if you click on them as you zoom over, you can get more information and see the multiple polygons that are there. So the resilient and connected network map, we'll turn that on, turn that off, and zoom out. The resilient and connected network map is TNC's blueprint for our protect land and water strategy, and we're using it to guide our internal protection priorities. And I just also want to touch on a few other case studies about how it's been used. In North Carolina, the RCN roadmap was used by the Sandhills Conservation Partnership, which is a collaboration between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the North Carolina Forest Service, Fort Bragg, and Nature Conservancy, and others, to expand the areas of work and to include the Yoweri Mountains And in this area, many longleaf species, such as the red-cocked woodpecker, have been disappearing due to the lack of fire management. But the RCN roadmap identified this area as being highly resilient due to its varying soils and topography. The partnership decided to expand their work to include this area to ensure that it could provide safe home to the sandhill's wide diversity of species as they migrate away from climate impacts. Another example is that the Land Trust Alliance has strongly encouraged their member organizations, their member land trusts, to become familiar with the RCN as a way to incorporate climate change into their acquisition planning. At least 60 land trusts have already been using this data, and we have presented it in the last several Land Trust Alliance rallies. And it was part of the plenary in 2019, and the president, Andrew Bowman, called this RCN roadmap a paradigm shift in how we think about large landscape conservation. TNC's resilient science was combined with additional data on water resources, rare species, and habitat connectivity collected from other organizations to create the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint. And I think this is a great example because we really are advocating that you can feel free to use the RCN in its entirety, but if specific parts of this are applicable to your work, feel free to pull out the individual layers and use them in your own analysis. So the New Jersey Blueprint has been used by numerous state agencies, land trusts, and other organizations, including the New Jersey's Green Acres Program and the State Agricultural Development Committee, to inform their land conservation decision-making. So right now I've just really walked you through the various layers on the tool. But the coolest part of this is it's just not like a map application where you can view the layers. It actually has the ability to do analysis for you. So one of the great things is that you can either, if you go up here, you can either sketch a polygon or upload a zip shape file. And this resilient land mapping tool for your parcel or area will calculate a whole bunch of different statistics for you. And we really see the main purpose of this is that kind of parcel level analysis or decision making. So for instance, if you are a small land trust and you were looking to prioritize a couple of different parcels, you could input them both, each of them, into this resilient land mapping tool, and you could get the statistics about all of these various layers for those parcels. So if you want to sketch a polygon, you just click on sketch a polygon. Helps to zoom in so you can see where you are. And you could sketch your polygon. And then once you sketch your polygon, you double click and it will run the tool. So I have an area that I have already selected. The tool does take about 45 seconds to run. It takes a little bit of time, not a ton, but just worthy to note that it is chugging in the background through all of this data. I have a parcel that I've already uploaded here. So when you upload a zip shape file, that's just a shape file with all of its components zipped up into a folder. You can upload the file and it will calculate that for you. And this area is in this area that we're looking at here is in New Hampshire, and it is between these two protected areas. So if we turn on the secured lands, I can actually close this and I'll come back. It's between these two protected areas. So a possible question could be, what if we connect these two protected areas? What kind of gains are we getting in the RCN? So here are the results here for this area. It tells you the total size of your area, what regions it's in, if it includes any existing protected land, and then goes through the resilient and connected network of results. So how much of this parcel is in the RCN. Here you can see that most of this is in this blue for resilient diffuse flow that's important for climate and has recognized biodiversity value. So it's really in a great area for all three of these categories that I went through. It is both resilient, has diffuse flow. Not only is it diffuse, but it's climate. It has lots of climate options, and it has recognized biodiversity value. So that would make it an excellent candidate for protection. The other ones are high resilient diffuse flow. This one isn't climate informed, but still very important for recognized biodiversity value. And it also has some pinch points here in the brown. So those are all on the RCN. Then thinking about the resilient sites in general, resilient sites, zooming into that one component, its resilience is slightly above average in the green. Its local connectedness is above average. Landscape diversity, it's probably one of the flatter areas. So its landscape diversity is about average. And then you can see here on the pie charts how this falls on landscapes. This says of that parcel I drew, 58% of it is slightly above average for resilient. 14% is above average, and 3% is far above average. So if I wanted to kind of narrow in this polygon, you could use that to kind of make your area more resilient. It also here tells you about the geophysical settings. So this parcel here, it's low elevation with a lot of acidic sedimentary, acidic granites. Those are the primary geophysical settings. So we hope this tool and this parcel allows people to make informed decisions as they're thinking about their protection and to prioritize parcels within their protection work. Now I'm going to hand this over to Annalee, and she's going to tell you about some additional tool functionality and talk about our resilient coastal sites analysis. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Melissa. I'll share my screen. Great. So as Melissa said, I'm going to talk first about our carbon analysis. So we recently launched a new feature in the Resilient Land Mapping tool that allows users to estimate existing carbon stock for any site in the lower 48 states by drawing a polygon or importing a shapefile and checking this box here where it says, let me move our, assess carbon data. And users can zoom in on forested areas to see how much carbon would be lost into the atmosphere if those forests were destroyed, and how much carbon those forests could potentially store over the next 30 years if they continue to grow on their current trajectory. The tool was developed to help quantify the multiple benefits derived from protecting or improving management of the RCN. And data includes the estimated current stock, which is based on 2010 data, and users can also get an estimate of carbon sequestration if a forested area continued growing. So let me show you how this works in the tool, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data that we use in this tool. So if you click on, you're starting out in the Resilient Sites tool, it's the first thing that comes up. If you click on the carbon estimates layer, you're going to get this warning, which I'll highlight again when we talk about sequestration. So you can click OK and turn on, let's start with the forest ecosystem carbon for 2010. That draws, and the legend down here shows it in metric tons per acre with the different colors. So we can zoom into an area and see what, again, the estimated existing carbon stock is, forest carbon stock is for an area. So here are a few key points on the data sets that we used in the tool. The forest carbon estimates are from Chris Williams and Natalia Hassler at Clark University. Estimates of 2010 forest carbon stock and components are above ground, coarse woody debris, and soil and other, or at a 30-meter pixel resolution, were created using a forest carbon cycle model trained to match forest inventory and analysis data. And that was used to predict carbon stocks for 2010 based on site level attributes of forest type group, years since disturbance, and site productivity class. Results were iterated backward in time to provide continuous annual reporting of forest carbon dynamics for each pixel. Most prior studies have lacked spatial detail on the age of forest stands that persisted in forested condition during the satellite data era, but this study used remotely sensed biomass to estimate the stand age condition of those persisting intact forests. So using the same model, Chris Williams and Natalia also provided estimates of potential future carbon. Now, the big caveat here is that assumes the forest grows undisturbed until 2050. So that's not considering major disturbances and or potentially improved management practices that might increase or increases in the frequency and severity of climatic disturbances. So this forest ecosystem carbon is just an estimate, again, assuming no disturbance. So please keep that in mind when you when you look at that particular layer. So for, just as Melissa showed with the RCN and resilient sites, users can draw a polygon or upload a zipped area, but the key point is to just check this button here and you can sketch a polygon. I'm going to look at, I'm going to turn on the forest carbon ecosystem for 2010, draw a very small polygon, and this will take about 30 to 90 seconds to run. And you can see here, it'll tell you what's happening in this little window. Currently it's reprojecting data. So we don't have to wait for this to run. I'm gonna zoom over to one where I've already run before. It's a slightly different area, but so now you'll have two tabs. So those resilience results, and then you click over here for the carbon results. And the first part of the results tell you, again, where the data sets come from for forest carbon. The soil carbon piece is for in non-forested areas, so grasslands, deserts, chaparral. We estimated carbon stock using a soil carbon data layer created by Mario Guevara and others at Oak Ridge Lab. And this layer estimates the carbon stock in the topsoil, or the upper 30 centimeters for 2010, based on sample points from NRCS, soil surveys, USGS, and site-specific research. Because it is only topsoil, the data is likely an underestimate of the total carbon stock. In addition, that original soil organic carbon data was at a 250 meter pixel resolution, so we resampled it to 30 meter to align with our forest carbon data and our RCN data. So again, that resampling introduces error as that original data was at a lower resolution. So if we scroll down here, we can see the forest carbon for 2010 in metric tons. And if we go down a little bit further here, we'll see the components that are broken out. So below ground is BG, above ground is AG, and CW is coarse woody debris. So you can see how the different components make up that total forest carbon estimate. And if we scroll down here, you can see the estimate for forest carbon 2050 and how those components break out. And then here's the potential, again, caveat, assuming no disturbance, for forest carbon sequestration from 2010 to 2050. And then here's the 40-year total and the annual rate. And then this is showing the soil carbon. So for any non-forested pixels, how much soil carbon is there? And also we have the land cover breakdown. So you can see that the majority of this site was in forest, and there is a small amount of non-forested areas. So the total carbon for 2010 is a combination of that forested carbon and the soil carbon in non-forest areas. So the total stock in 2010 is 904,689 metric tons estimate. And I just want to also note that if your area does contain both forest and non-forest, only the forest carbon data sets allow for the prediction of carbon sequestration potential to 2050. So that 2050 estimate does not have a soil organic component. And again, if you want to look at those underlying data sets, you can click on them here. And if you ever need more information about a data set, you can click here and it'll give you a brief description, any references for it. And then same with the soil organic carbon, you can click here, scroll down to see what that legend looks like in metric tons per acre, the different colors that represent. You can always click, as Melissa was showing, to get more information about it anywhere in the lower 48 states. So again, this is just telling you where this data set came from and what the estimate is for that particular location. And that's the sequestration layer. And lastly, the national land cover data set, just so you can get a sense of, if you're drawing a polygon or uploading, how much forested versus non-forested area there is. So that's our new carbon tool. We're excited to have, and it's been getting a lot of use and interest. And if you do have any questions or issues about reforestation, this tool isn't designed to identify places with the highest potential for reforestation to increase carbon sequestration. So we recommend checking out reforestationhub.org for that particular topic. So we hope this tool can help decision makers, natural resource managers, et cetera, address both climate change and biodiversity loss, since forests not only sequester carbon, but also serve as important habitat for many species. So for example, the data could help officials determine whether to allow timber harvesting or to prioritize regions that are vulnerable to wildfire and other disasters. It could also improve greenhouse gas accounting and identify opportunities for small landowners to participate in emerging carbon markets. Now I'm going to switch gears to our coastal analysis, where we had to figure out how to address the issue of sea level rise. So I'm going to pop up a slide for this PowerPoint slide. My Zoom controls are getting in my way. Oh. Sorry, y'all, bear with me. All right. So to address the issue of sea level rise, we evaluated coastal sites separately from terrestrial areas. So I'm going to provide an overview of our coastal assessments and then use the resilient land mapping tool to show how we integrated the coastal results into the resilient sites and the resilient and connected network. We conducted the coastal analysis for 3 geographies in the US, the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, the South Atlantic, and the Gulf of Mexico. And just as with the terrestrial resilience analysis, we had experts on region-specific steering committees to serve as advisors and adapted the analyses to fit each geography. And to learn more about the methods and results in our resilient coastal sites analysis, please visit this link up here, where you can access each geography's report, data sets, web maps, and story maps. There's a lot that went into the resilient coastal sites analysis, and we only pull out some very specific pieces for the RCN. So I highly recommend checking out the full analysis results if you're interested in any coastal issues. So again, to address, we can define a resilient coastal site as an actual physical location, specifically interconnected tidal habitats, including salt marsh and tidal flats, with characteristics that we expect will allow the site to maintain diversity and key processes as it adapts to sea level rise. We do expect coastal sites to change, probably pretty dramatically over the next century. Many existing marshes are already converting to open water, and new tidal habitats are forming or migrating to those adjacent lowlands where that space is available. We assigned each site a resilience score based on the likelihood that its coastal habitats could migrate to adjacent lowlands. And a coastal site was considered more resilient if it had more options for adapting to or accommodating risk, and we considered it more vulnerable if it had less options. So here's an example of a coastal site. It is made up of a tidal complex, which is shown here in blue. And again, that's that salt marsh, tidal flats, interconnected tidal habitat. The key component of a resilient coastal site is the availability of migration space, which is shown here in different shades of orange. And the different shades just correspond to different sea level rise scenarios. Sites vary widely in the amount and suitability of the migration space they have. And this is really a reflection of the physical structure of the site and the intactness of processes that that facilitate migration. So a marsh hemmed in by rocky cliffs will eventually convert to open water, whereas a marsh that has a lot of low-lying wetlands with ample migration space and supporting conditions will have the potential to move upslope or inland. We divided each of the 3 geographies that I mentioned previously, the South Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, into coastal shoreline regions, or CSRs, that share similar processes and dominant estuary types. And then the relative resilience of each coastal site was determined by comparing it to other sites with the same shoreline, within that same shoreline region. So you can almost think of those as analogous to our geophysical settings and the terrestrial resilience. So this site shown here in St. Catharines Sound in Georgia is expected to be resilient, again, relative to its shoreline region, based on a suite of physical and condition attributes we calculated. And the summary of those is shown here on the right. The physical characteristics of a site determine if there is land available to support the migration of tidal habitats and are shown in order of influence. In our model, a tidal marsh that has access to a large migration space that is predicted to have a range of future tidal classes offers more possibilities for sustaining diversity than a tidal complex with a small migration space. And this particular site has a large marsh, it has a large migration space. It also has an extensive buffer area, which is shown in green and refers to the adjacent natural and agricultural land that surrounds both the marsh and its migration space. So while the physical factors focus on the size and geometry of the site and its migration space, the condition factors focus on the processes that we think are important to enable the migration and formation of new tidal marsh. In our condition model, a tidal complex whose upland or upslope edge has few anthropogenic barriers, so there aren't any roads or buildings that could prevent the marsh from moving into its migration space. And it has a relatively good sediment supply, good water quality, and limited freshwater flow alteration. We think that marsh will have the supporting condition attributes to help facilitate movement into its migration space. So we combined the normalized scores for the physical and condition factors to calculate an index of site resilience. And to account for uncertainty, we calculated resilience scores for multiple sea level rise scenarios. We also looked at that trend, or how does the migration space size change over time for those scenarios. And we also looked at the condition and physical features of the buffer area. Depending on the geography, the final scores are given for the 6 or the 6.5 foot sea level rise scenario. We wanted to give a long-term picture of resilience for these coastal sites. And with these results, we hope communities and resource managers can better prioritize land acquisition and identify areas for restoration to sustain the natural benefits provided by coastal habitats. Now I'm going to switch over to our resilient land mapping tool to show how we incorporated the results of this analysis into the tool. So I'm going to click on our resilient sites and zoom into a coastal area here. And scroll down to the legends. You can see, orientate yourself to what the different colors represent. All tidal complexes that scored greater than average relative to their shoreline region for the 6.5 foot sea level rise scenario in this particular geography were classified as resilient tidal habitat and are shown in purple. So here is this particular tidal habitat or complex was scored above average for the 6.5 foot sea level rise scenario. And then in those sites that scored less than average are shown in this kind of yellowishy tan color. And then we also pulled out the migration space. So if you click on any of, let's say we want to look at this resilient tidal habitat, you can click on it and I'll tell you a little bit more information about its score. Its resilient score was above average. And again, we calculate our scores relative to the coastal shoreline region. And we used a normalized units, or z-scores. So it was 1.64 units, standard deviation units above the mean for that particular shoreline region. And then it tells you a little bit more about this analysis. And then here's the migration space shown in blue that we pulled out. And it's telling you that we assigned the highest score, because a migration space could be related to more than one tidal complex. The migration space, the resilience score it received was the highest of all the tidal complexes to which it could potentially be related. We also included we have this area that's called sea level rise area, which is this gray area. So this is any area that's 6 feet or less in elevation where we decide not to include terrestrial resilience results if they are within this zone, as these lands are likely to be inundated in the future. So if there was no tidal marsh or migration space data for the area and it is within this zone, we just simply show it in this gray color. Now for the RCN, the Resilient Connected Network, we simply pulled out the migration space of resilient coastal sites. Again, sites that scored higher than average relative to their shoreline region. And these are essentially treated as climate corridors in the Resilient and Connected Network. Again, you can click on it here to get more information. So this location is characterized as resilience and flow, and then using the detailed classes, it is characterized as migration space for tidal habitat. So if we were to click on that RCN with the more detailed categories that Melissa noted, you can see in the legend migration space for tidal habitat, or if you clicked on it, it'll tell you that as well. So that is how we incorporated the coastal analysis into the RCN. And again, as I said, we just pulled out some of the pieces of that result that we thought were the most important for the RCN, but if you want to learn more, or if you have more of a coastal interest, please do visit our resilient coastal sites where you can download the data and go to story maps and web maps to understand the analysis a bit more for the 3 geographies for which we conducted this analysis. So Melissa, I think that's all I've got.
Fantastic. Thank you, Annalee.
Let me stop sharing.
To wrap up, I'd just like to once again mention that we have reports for each of these individual analysis areas that we've done. So we have it for coastal, as Annalee showed, but also for each of the different regions in the resilient sites. And then we also have a whole bunch of different articles and media stories that present a more general overview of the resilient and connected networks. For instance, ARC User Magazine, the Boston Globe did an op-ed that Mark Anderson wrote, some Nature Conservancy articles, peer-reviewed publications, and these can all be reached on, accessed on our CRCS website at crcs.tnc.org. And then to access the data, there's 3 real ways to access the data. The easiest, as we've described today, is through the Resilient Land Mapping tool, but maybe after playing with that, you want to bring the data into your own projects. For intermediate users, we've created ArcGIS Online authoritative data, so you can bring that into your ArcPro or ArcMap projects, or through your own ArcGIS Online maps, and you can access those either through just your interface in Esri products or through our website. There's tabs for looking at the data. And then the most advanced way is to download the data, and all the data downloads, all of it's publicly available and available for download. We've tried to make it easy so that you can download the entire country, or you can download it by region or state. And you can access that either through our CRCS website or directly at nature.org/climate resilience. And I just want to thank you for listening to our demonstration of the Resilient Land Mapping tool. And feel free to check out the mapping tool, our CRCS website, or email us at crcs@tnc.org if you have any questions. Thank you.